Prologue: The Child of the Forest. The woods surrounding Altdorf, capital of the empire, were not known for their kindness. Ancient oaks stretched their skeletal branches skyward, gnarled and twisted like the fingers of some forgotten god. Deep within the Reichwald forest, shadows clung to the trees, and the air carried whispers of secrets long buried beneath the loamy soil. It was here, in the chill embrace of an autumn dawn, that a woodsman stumbled upon a discovery that would change the fate of the empire. He was a simple man, this woodsman, thick of beard and broad of shoulder, with hands calloused from years of felling trees. Known only as Otto, he was returning to Altdorf after a long night of trapping game. His sack hung heavy with rabbits and pheasants, and his thoughts were on the warmth of a fire and the stew-pot awaiting him at home. As he trudged along the forest path, a faint sound reached his ears, a cry, soft and plaintive, almost lost beneath the rustling leaves. Otto paused, his brow furrowing. It was too early in the season for wolf cubs, and the cry was too weak for anything larger. Curiosity compelled him to step off the path, his boots crunching over fallen leaves. He pushed aside a tangle of brambles and froze. There, nestled in the hollow of an old tree, was a bundle of cloth. The shimmering fabric, woven with a strange iridescence, seemed to catch the light in ways that defied nature. Within the bundle lay a baby, no more than a few months old, its small face scrunched in distress. Otto's heart, hardened by years of toil and solitude, softened at the sight. He bent to lift the child, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he cradled the infant. The child's cries ceased, replaced by an almost unnatural calm. For a moment, Otto thought he saw a faint glow emanating from the cloth, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Sigmar's mercy," he muttered, glancing around. There was no sign of who or what had left the child here. The forest was silent, save for the distant call of a raven. By the time Otto reached the city gates of Altdorf, the first rays of sunlight were spilling over the rooftops. The guards gave him strange looks as he approached, the infant still cradled in his arms. Muttering something about abandoned orphans, he made his way to the Sisters of the Eternal Light, an orphanage run by the Church of Sigmar. The abbess, a stern woman with a face carved from stone, took one look at the baby and made the sign of the hammer. "Where did you find this child?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "In the forest," Otto replied. "Abandoned. Wrapped in this." He held out the shimmering cloth, but the abbess refused to touch it. The child, now calm and quiet, stared at the abbess with wide, curious eyes. For a moment, she seemed to waver, her stern exterior cracking. "Very well," she said at last. "We will take him in." "What will you call him?" Otto asked. The abbess considered the child for a long moment. "Eryndor," she said, as though the name had been whispered into her ear. Eryndor grew quickly, and with him grew the rumors. The other orphans whispered of strange things happening when he was nearby, candles flickering to life without a spark, the air growing heavy during his fits of anger, and an odd feeling of calm when he laughed. The abbess watched him with wary eyes, though she said nothing of her suspicions. She often prayed in the chapel late into the night, her whispered words carrying a note of unease. Eryndor remained blissfully unaware of the tension he caused. He loved the sprawling halls of the orphanage, the sound of the city bustling outside its walls, and the rare moments of kindness from the sisters. Yet, on quiet nights when the wind howled through the eaves, he often dreamed of the forest, a dream filled with glowing lights and whispers he could never quite understand. And so the boy grew, as ordinary as any other orphan in Altdorf, or so it seemed, but the winds of magic, invisible to all but a chosen few, had begun to stir around him. His destiny was waiting, hidden like a spark ready to ignite. Far away, in the shadow of the celestial college, A magister of the Amber Order paused in his studies, his brow furrowing. He had felt a shift in the winds, faint but undeniable. Somewhere in the Empire, a new player had entered the great game of fate. Little did he know, the child was only just beginning to walk the path that would shape the destiny of the old world. Chapter 1. A Flicker of Power. The winds of autumn howled through the streets of Altdorf, rattling the shutters of the orphanage. Eryndor, now 10 years old, sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor of the chapel. The flickering candlelight danced across his face as he watched the flame with an intensity beyond his years. His hands rested on his knees, his breathing slow and measured. "Just a little closer," he whispered. The flame quivered, as if responding to his words. For a moment it stretched higher, casting strange shadows on the vaulted ceiling, then just as quickly it returned to normal. Eryndor smiled, satisfied. He wasn't sure how or why, but he knew he had made it happen. The strange occurrences began as small, almost forgettable moments. A broom tumbling over when Eryndor was nearby. A chill in the air whenever he was angry. But as he grew, the phenomena became harder to ignore. During thunderstorms, faint lights would appear in his room, flickering like trapped fireflies. At night, the other orphans whispered about him, their voices carrying fear and curiosity in equal measure. The abbess, always a stern and cautious woman, observed Eryndor with increasing unease. She had always suspected there was something unnatural about the boy. When one of the younger orphans swore he had seen Eryndor make a stack of books float across the room, her fears could no longer be ignored. One morning, as the city's bells tolled the start of the day, 2 figures arrived at the orphanage gates. They were clad in heavy black cloaks, their armor bearing the twin-tailed comet of Sigmar. The witch hunters, grim and unyielding, were the Empire's first line of defense against heresy and sorcery. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running across his face, introduced himself as Captain Reinhard von Strom. The abbess greeted them with nervous reverence. "There is a boy," she said, her voice trembling. "Strange things happen around him. I fear he may be a witch." Reinhardt's cold eyes narrowed. "Take us to him." Eryndor was in the courtyard, sweeping fallen leaves into a pile when the witch hunters approached. He glanced up, and the sight of their blackened armor and stern faces sent a shiver through him. Reinhardt's presence was oppressive, like the weight of a thunderstorm about to break. "You," Reinhardt said, his voice sharp. "What is your name, boy?" "Eryndor," he replied, clutching the broom tightly. "I haven't done anything wrong." Reinhardt strode closer, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "We'll see about that." The witch hunters questioned Eryndor and the other orphans for hours, pressing them for details about the strange events. Finally, as dusk began to fall, Reinhardt declared his intention to take the boy into custody. But before they could act, a new figure arrived at the orphanage, a tall man in flowing robes of deep ochre, his staff capped with a carved amber gemstone. He introduced himself as Magister Kaelric of the Amber Order, a wizard specializing in the magic of the wilds. "I sensed something," Kaelric said, his gaze fixed on Eryndor. "The winds of magic are strong around this boy." Reinhard scowled. "He's a danger. A witch." "No," Kaelric replied calmly. "He is not a witch, but he is gifted. The colleges of magic will take him into their care." Reinhard hesitated. The witch hunters despised magic, even the sanctioned kind taught in the colleges, but they had no authority over the wizards. After a tense moment, he stepped aside. "Fine," Reinhard growled, "but mark my words, Mage. If the boy becomes a threat, I will deal with him personally." Kaelric nodded, unperturbed. "If that day comes, Captain, I will not stand in your way." That night, Eryndor left the orphanage for the last time. As he climbed into the Magister's carriage, he glanced back at the darkened windows where the other orphans watched in silence. He wasn't sure if he was leaving behind a curse or a gift. But either way, his life in Altdorf was over. The journey to the colleges of magic was quiet, save for the hum of the carriage wheels and the occasional muttering of Keirik. The wizard's presence was reassuring, yet enigmatic. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with a confidence that made Eryndor feel both safe and uneasy. "You have a gift, boy," Keirik said at last, breaking the silence. "A dangerous gift, but if you learn to control it, you can do great things." Eryndor nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what to believe. All he knew was that he was heading toward a world he didn't understand, a world that whispered of power, danger, and destiny. As the carriage passed through the gates of Altdorf, the spires of the colleges of magic loomed ahead, their shapes silhouetted against the night sky. Eryndor couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and awe. The winds of magic swirled around him, unseen yet undeniable, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Chapter 2. The Colleges of Magic. The towering spires of the Celestial College pierced the sky like jagged shards of crystal. Hidden by arcane wards and illusions, the college remained invisible to ordinary citizens, standing as a mystical haven for those attuned to the wind of Azir, the blue wind of the heavens. Its halls shimmered faintly, as if they existed just out of sync with the rest of the world, and the air inside was charged with energy. Eryndor followed Magister Keirik through the twisting corridors, his eyes wide with awe. Constellations were etched into the walls, glowing softly as if alive. Globes of enchanted starlight floated above, casting the halls in an ethereal glow. For a boy who had never known anything beyond the orphanage, this place was otherworldly. Keirik stopped in front of a large iron door inscribed with intricate runes. He placed his palm against it, and the runes flared briefly before the door swung open. Inside was a small room containing a simple bed, a desk, and a single window overlooking the city below. "This will be your quarters," Keirik said. "It is a humble beginning, but all initiates start here. Your training will begin tomorrow." Eryndor nodded, unable to tear his gaze away from the view. The stars seemed brighter here, as if the college itself brought him closer to the heavens. The first lessons. The following day, Eryndor's training began in earnest. Like all initiates, he was taught to focus solely on the wind of Azir, the magical force associated with the skies, prophecy, and cosmic order. His instructors, magisters cloaked in robes adorned with stars and moons, drilled him in the fundamentals, meditation, attunement, and basic spell casting. Eryndor quickly proved to be an eager student. He took to the exercises with a determination that impressed even the most jaded magisters. His first attempts at spellcasting were shaky. Sparks of blue energy would flicker and die in his hands, but within weeks he could summon small bursts of starlight and even glimpse faint patterns in the night sky that hinted at future events. Despite his progress, Eryndor found the discipline of the college suffocating. The magisters demanded perfection, and failure was met with sharp reprimands. Worse still, the visions he began to experience during meditation were not always tied to the wind of Azir. Occasionally he saw flashes of fire or felt the whisper of winds that did not belong to the heavens. He kept these experiences to himself, fearing what his instructors might think. An unusual talent. One evening, during a lesson in star charts and divination, Eryndor made a mistake. His task was to map a constellation's movements, predicting its influence on the Empire's fortunes. Frustrated by the intricate calculations, he closed his eyes and reached out instinctively, letting the magic guide him. When he opened his eyes, the star chart was complete. His fellow students gasped, and his instructor, Magister Valtir, stared at him in disbelief. "You did this without the equations?" Valtir asked. "I just knew," Eryndor replied hesitantly. Valtir's eyes narrowed. "Magic is not guesswork, boy. You will not repeat this reckless behavior." But in the days that followed, other anomalies began to emerge. During a lesson on weather manipulation, Eryndor accidentally summoned a small breeze, despite the fact that the wind of Azia did not govern air currents. During another exercise, his attempts to create starlight briefly produced flames instead. Though these incidents were minor, they did not go unnoticed. The whispers among the magisters grew louder. Initiates were only meant to channel a single wind of magic. To do otherwise was dangerous, potentially catastrophic. The winds were volatile forces, and attempting to harness more than one was like holding a raging storm in one's hands. The secret meeting. Late one night, a group of senior magisters convened in the astrolabe chamber, the highest room in the college. Its walls were lined with telescopes and star charts, and the ceiling was an enchanted dome that reflected the constellations above. "His abilities are unnatural," Magister Voltaire began, pacing the room. "He shows signs of attunement to other winds, Gairan, Akshi, perhaps even Ulugul. This should not be possible." Kayrik, seated in the corner, folded his arms. "And yet it is. You have seen his progress. He is no ordinary initiate. That is precisely why he is dangerous," Voltaire snapped. "The winds are not meant to mingle. If he continues down this path, he could destabilize himself, or worse, invite the attention of chaos." Another magister, Anathael, spoke up. "We cannot ignore the potential here. If he can learn to control this anomaly, he could become one of the greatest wizards the Empire has ever known." "And if he cannot?" Valthier countered. "Will you take responsibility when he succumbs to madness, or when the witch hunters come knocking at our gates?" Kellerk raised a hand. "Enough. The boy is still an initiate. We will continue his training, but under close supervision. If his abilities prove too dangerous, we will act accordingly." "And if they do not?" Anathael asked. Kellerik's expression was grim. "Then we may be witnessing the birth of something entirely new, a spark of destiny." In his chambers, Eryndor sat cross-legged on the floor, his hands resting on his knees. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of magic in the air. He closed his eyes and reached out, letting the winds swirl around him. For a brief moment, he felt them all: the fiery heat of Akshi, the soothing flow of Gairan, the cold shadows of Ulgu, and, of course, the guiding light of Azir. They surrounded him like threads of a tapestry, each distinct, yet connected. He opened his eyes, and a faint glow illuminated the room. The winds quieted, but the sense of something greater lingered. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew one thing for certain. His journey had only just begun. Chapter 3: Trials and Triumphs. The chill of isolation weighed heavily on Eryndor. Though the halls of the Celestial College were bustling with students and magisters, he often felt as though he walked them alone. The other initiates whispered behind his back, their voices tinged with both fear and jealousy. Even his instructors regarded him with a mix of wariness and fascination, their praise often tempered with sharp warnings about the dangers of his growing power. But Eryndor endured. He threw himself into his studies, mastering the intricacies of Azir while quietly experimenting with the other winds that seemed to call to him. By the time he was 16, his abilities had surpassed many of his peers. Yet for all his progress, a shadow lingered over him, a nagging sense that he was meant for something far greater and far more perilous than the quiet life of a college wizard. The vision. One night, as Eryndor meditated in the star chamber, a sudden force seized him. The air seemed to crackle with energy, and his vision blurred. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the chamber. He stood in a vast, desolate plain, the sky above swirling with dark clouds. Fires burned in the distance, and the air reeked of ash and blood. As he turned, he saw them, hordes of chaos warriors marching south, their banners bearing the sigils of the dark gods. Mutated beasts roared as they surged forward, their twisted forms barely recognizable as living creatures. At the center of the horde stood a towering figure clad in jagged black armor, a great axe in one hand and a staff crackling with unholy power in the other. The figure turned, and though its face was hidden beneath a helm, Eryndor felt its gaze pierce him. A voice, cold and mocking, echoed in his mind. "You cannot stop what is coming, little mage. The winds will tear you apart, and your empire will burn." The vision shattered, and Eryndor gasped, his body trembling. The star chamber was silent once more, but the images lingered in his mind. The next morning, Eryndor reported the vision to his instructors. The magisters listened politely, their faces betraying no emotion. When he finished, Magister Kaelric leaned forward. "Many initiates experience vivid dreams during their training," he said. "The winds of Azir often show us glimpses of possible futures. But these visions are not always reliable." "This was no ordinary dream," Eryndor insisted. "The horde is coming. We must warn the Empire." Kaelr sighed. "You are young, Eryndor. You lack the experience to interpret what you saw. Focus on your studies. Leave the fate of the Empire to those better equipped to handle it." The dismissal stung, but Eryndor knew better than to argue. He returned to his quarters, frustration simmering beneath the surface. The vision had felt too real to ignore, but without the Magister's support, there was little he could do. The skirmish at Hohendorf. Weeks later, Eryndor's resolve was tested. Reports of an orc raiding party terrorizing the villages near Hohendorf reached the college, and a small group of initiates was sent to assist the local militia. Eryndor was among them, accompanied by Magister Valthyr and 2 senior students. The village was in chaos when they arrived. Smoke billowed from burning buildings, and the air was thick with the cries of the wounded. The orcs, brutish and relentless, had overwhelmed the militia's defenses, and it was clear that without magical intervention, Hohendorf would fall. Magister Valthyr took charge, ordering the initiates to focus on defensive spells while he engaged the orc leader. But as the battle raged, it became clear that the plan was failing. The orcs were too numerous and the militia too disorganized. The village square, the last line of defense, was about to be overrun. It was then that Eryndor acted, unleashing the winds. Drawing upon the blue wind of Azir, Eryndor called down a bolt of lightning, striking an orc berserker in the heart. But as he prepared to cast another spell, he felt the other winds stirring around him, the fiery rage of Akshi, the verdant pulse of Giran, and even the shadowy tendrils of Ulgu. Instinctively he reached out, weaving the winds together. A wall of fire erupted before the orcs, forcing them back, while a burst of healing energy revitalized the wounded militia. Shadows coiled around the remaining villagers, hiding them from the attackers' sight. For a brief moment, the battlefield fell silent, the orcs stunned by the display of power. Then, with a deafening roar, the militia surged forward, rallying behind Eryndor's magic. Within minutes, the orcs were routed, their leaders slain and their forces scattered. When the dust settled, the villagers and militia stared at Eryndor with a mixture of awe and fear. Even Magister Valthyr seemed shaken, his stern expression betraying a hint of unease. "You disobeyed my orders," Valthyr said, his voice low. "What you did? It was reckless, dangerous." "It saved lives," Eryndor replied, his tone defiant. Valtyr's eyes narrowed. "You may have won the battle, boy, but you have no idea what forces you've tampered with. This will not go unnoticed." Dangerous attention. Upon returning to the college, Eryndor's actions were the subject of heated debate among the magisters. While some praised his bravery and skill, others voiced their concerns about his ability to channel multiple winds of magic. Such talent was unheard of, and many feared it would lead to disaster. Magister Kaelr, ever his advocate, defended Eryndor. "He acted out of necessity," he argued. "Would you have preferred the village to burn? The boy has a gift, one that could change the Empire's fortunes, and one that could doom it, Valtir countered. "The winds are not meant to mingle. If he continues down this path, he will attract the attention of chaos, or worse." The debate ended with no clear resolution, but the seeds of doubt had been sown. Eryndor's actions had saved Hockendorf, but they had also set him on a path fraught with peril. The winds of magic were growing stronger around him, and with them came whispers of power, temptation, and destiny. Far to the north, in the desolate wastes of chaos, a figure clad in black armor stood beneath a roiling sky. The winds carried with them the faint echoes of Eryndor's magic, and the figure smiled. "The boy is strong," the Chaos Sorcerer murmured, "but strength can be broken." Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. The summons to return to Altdorf came on a brisk autumn morning, carried by a messenger clad in the formal blue and gold livery of the Celestial College. Eryndor, still weary from his ordeal in Hockendorf, read the sealed parchment with trembling hands. The letter was short and curt. He was to report immediately to the college council chamber for a formal inquiry into his actions during the skirmish. The journey back to the capital was uneasy. Despite the praises of the villagers and militia in Hockendorf, Eryndor couldn't shake the sense that his unorthodox use of magic had put him under a dangerous spotlight. The lingering memories of the winds he had wielded, fire, life, shadow, were both exhilarating and terrifying. He could feel their whispers even now, just beyond his grasp. When Altdorf's towering gates came into view, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. This was no triumphant return. It felt like Judgment Day. Scrutiny and suspicion. The council chamber of the Celestial College was as intimidating as Eryndor remembered. The high-vaulted ceiling sparkled with enchanted star maps, and the magisters, draped in robes of deep blue and silver, sat in a semicircle that resembled the crescent moon. Their faces were stern, their gazes piercing. Magister Kaelric was present, though he sat slightly apart from the others, his expression unreadable. Magister Valthia, however, stood at the forefront, his voice sharp as he opened the proceedings. "Eryndor Valfir began, you have been summoned here to account for your actions in Hockendorf. Reports indicate that you not only used the wind of Azir, but also tapped into Akshai, Gairan, and Ulgu. Such recklessness is not only dangerous, it is forbidden." Eryndor took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet Valtir's gaze. "I acted to save lives. The militia was failing, and without my intervention the village would have been lost." "That is not the point," Valthir snapped. "The winds of magic are chaotic forces, each vying for dominance. To channel multiple winds is to court disaster. You risked not only your life, but the stability of the very magic you wield." Another magister, Anathiel, spoke up. "And yet the boy succeeded. His actions may have been unconventional, but they were effective. Perhaps there is something we can learn from this anomaly." Valtir glared at her, but said nothing. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the star maps above. Finally, Kaelric spoke. "What's done is done. The question now is what to do with Eryndor. Clearly his presence here has become complicated. A new opportunity." Later that evening, Kaelric summoned Eryndor to his chambers. Unlike the council chamber, Kaelric's quarters were warm and inviting, filled with books, alchemical equipment, and the faint scent of incense. "You handled yourself well today," Kaelric said, gesturing for Eryndor to sit. "But you must understand that the college is not a place for uncertainty. Your talents, remarkable as they are, place you at odds with everything we teach here." Eryndor frowned. "So what happens now? Am I to be expelled?" Kaelric shook his head. "No, but neither can you remain here under the current circumstances. The council has agreed to send you to Wissenland, where your abilities might be put to better use." "Wissenland?" Eryndor asked, surprised. "The Elector Count, Otto von Falkenstein, has requested the assistance of a mage," Kaelric explained. "He's an ambitious man, and Wissenland is a province fraught with conflict, both internal and external. You'll serve as his court wizard, advising him on magical matters and aiding in the defense of his lands." Eryndor hesitated. "Why me? Surely there are more experienced wizards." "None like you," Kaelrich interrupted. "Falkenstein has an eye for potential, and you have more potential than any initiate I've ever seen. This is an opportunity, Eryndor. Take it." The road to Wissenland. 2 days later, Eryndor departed Altdorf, his belongings packed into a modest satchel. The journey to Wissenland was long and arduous, taking him through dense forests, over rocky hills, and across the wide rivers of the Reichland. As the days passed, he found himself wondering what awaited him in Falkenstein's court. Would he be welcomed as a savior or mistrusted as an outsider? The idea of leaving the colleges, the only home he had known for years, left him feeling both liberated and untethered. When he finally arrived in the city of Nuln, Wissenland's bustling capital, he was struck by its stark contrast to Altdorf. Where the Empire's capital was grand and imposing, Nuln was gritty and industrious, its streets filled with the clang of forges and the rattle of carts laden with ore from the nearby mines. Eryndor was met at the gates by a man in ornate armor, his gray beard trimmed with military precision. "You must be the Mage," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm Captain Gunther Kohl, commander of Count Falkenstein's guard. Welcome to Nuln." Eryndor shook his hand, nodding. "I'm Eryndor." Kohl gave him a scrutinizing look but said nothing more, leading him through the crowded streets to the Count's keep. The fortress was a hulking structure of stone and iron, its towers bristling with artillery. It was clear that Falkenstein was a man who valued strength above all else. The court of Otto von Falkenstein. Count Falkenstein was waiting in his audience chamber, a tall man with a commanding presence and piercing eyes. He wore a fur-lined cloak over his armor, and his voice was deep and authoritative. "So, you're the Mage Kaelrich spoke of," Falkenstein said, studying Eryndor carefully. "You look young, but I've heard impressive things about you." "I will do my best to serve, my lord," Eryndor replied, bowing his head. Falkenstein nodded. "Good. Wissenland is not a safe place, Mage. Orcs raid our borders, chaos cults fester in the shadows, and the politics of the elector counts are as treacherous as any battlefield. I need someone who can handle these threats, someone I can trust." Eryndor met the Count's gaze. "I won't let you down." Falkenstein smiled faintly. "We'll see. A new beginning." That night, as Eryndor stood on the battlements of Falkenstein's keep, he looked out over the city of Nuln. The stars above seemed brighter here, and the winds of magic swirled around him with an almost tangible intensity. He was far from the safety of the colleges, but for the first time he felt truly free. His path was uncertain, his future fraught with danger, but he knew one thing for certain. His journey had only just begun. Far to the north, in the shadow of the chaos wastes, a figure clad in black armor knelt before a blazing altar. The winds of magic whispered to him, carrying the faint echoes of Eryndor's growing power. "The boy has left the nest," the figure murmured. "Let us see if he can fly." Chapter 5. Life at Falkenstein's court. The court of Elector Count Otto von Falkenstein was unlike anything Eryndor had experienced at the Celestial College. In Altdorf he had lived among scholars and magisters, his life governed by discipline and study. In Nuln the stakes were far more tangible. Here politics and intrigue danced a deadly waltz, and alliances shifted as easily as the winds of magic. Some of the magisters assumed a stiflingly pervasive nig pain. Falkenstein's keep was the heart of the city, a fortress of iron and stone that reflected the Count's pragmatic nature. The halls bustled with soldiers, merchants, and nobles, all vying for the Count's attention or favor. Eryndor, as the new court wizard, quickly found himself an object of fascination and suspicion. navigating the court. From the moment he arrived, Eryndor's days were filled with courtly responsibilities. He attended council meetings, advised Falkenstein on magical matters, and observed the political maneuverings of the court. The most influential figures quickly made themselves known. Lady Katharina von Schreiber, Falkenstein's spymaster, was a woman of sharp wit and sharper instincts. She had an uncanny ability to uncover secrets, and her presence always seemed to cast a shadow over the room. Despite her cold demeanor, she treated Eryndor with cautious respect. Captain Gunther Kohl, the grizzled commander of the Count's Guard, was a man of action and few words. He saw the world in black and white. An enemy was either a threat to be eliminated or a nuisance to be ignored. Though skeptical of magic, he valued Eryndor's combat abilities. Eryndor quickly realized that surviving Falkenstein's court required more than magical skill. He needed to understand the delicate balance of power among these players, and that meant earning their trust, or at least avoiding their ire. A dark mystery. It wasn't long before Eryndor's abilities were put to the test. Rumors began to circulate about strange disappearances in the countryside surrounding Nuln. Farmers abandoned their homesteads, miners vanished without a trace, and travelers reported eerie lights in the hills at night. Falkenstein convened his council to discuss the matter. Katharina was the first to speak. "My agents report whispers of a chaos cult operating in the area," she said, her tone as measured as ever. "They're using the disappearances to spread fear and destabilize the province." Captain Cole scoffed. "Rumors and whispers. Send a patrol to deal with it." "It's not that simple," Katharina replied coolly. "If there is a cult, it's well hidden. We need more than brute force." Falkenstein turned to Eryndor. "What do you think, wizard? You've seen what chaos can do." Eryndor hesitated. "If chaos is involved, it won't be easily rooted out, but I can investigate. If there's magic at work, I'll sense it." Falkenstein nodded. "Then it's settled. Katharina, Gunther, you'll accompany Eryndor, find out what's happening, and deal with it." The abandoned mine. The investigation led them to a series of abandoned mines in the hills outside Nuln. The air grew colder as they approached, and Eryndor felt a faint pulse of magic in the distance. Faint, but unmistakable. "This place stinks of chaos," Cole muttered, gripping the hilt of his sword. Eryndor nodded. "There's something here. Stay close." The mine entrance was dark and foreboding, its wooden supports rotting from neglect. Katharina motioned for her agents to spread out, their movements silent as shadows. Eryndor conjured a faint ball of starlight to illuminate the way, the glow casting eerie patterns on the walls. As they ventured deeper, the air grew thick with the stench of decay. Strange symbols scrawled in blood covered the walls, and the faint sound of chanting echoed through the tunnels. "They're close," Katharina whispered. "Be ready." The cult of Tzeentch. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, its floor littered with bones and tattered remnants of clothing. At the center of the chamber stood a makeshift altar, surrounded by robed figures chanting in an unholy tongue. A pulsating orb of dark energy floated above the altar, its surface rippling with unnatural colors. Eryndor recognized the signs immediately. This was no mere cult. It was a gathering of Tzeentch worshippers, and they were summoning something far worse than their warped minds. "We can't let them finish," Eryndor hissed. "Prepare yourselves." Cole gave a curt nod, signaling his soldiers to advance. Katharina's agents melted into the shadows, knives gleaming in the faint light, but before they could strike, the chanting stopped, and the cultists turned as one. "To them," their leader hissed, his voice distorted by the dark magic coursing through him. To the battle. Chaos erupted as the cultists charged. Cole and his soldiers met them with steel, while Katharina and her agents struck from the shadows, dispatching their foes with ruthless efficiency. Eryndor focused on the altar, his eyes locked on the swirling orb of energy. Calling upon the wind of his ear, he unleashed a bolt of lightning that struck the altar, disrupting the spell. The orb flickered but did not fade. The cult leader, his body grotesquely twisted by magic, turned on Eryndor with a snarl. "You meddle with forces beyond your comprehension, boy," the cultist roared, hurling a wave of dark energy at him. Eryndor countered instinctively, weaving the winds of Aesir and Akshi together. A wall of fire erupted between him and the cultist, forcing his opponent back. The cavern trembled as the conflicting magics clashed, the air thick with power. The battle raged on, and Eryndor realized the summoning ritual was still incomplete. Drawing on every ounce of his strength, he wove the winds of magic together, creating a spell that combined the stabilizing force of Gairan with the destructive fury of Akshi. The resulting explosion engulfed the altar, shattering the orb and banishing the dark energy. Aftermath. When the dust settled, the cavern was silent. The surviving cultists lay dead or unconscious, and the unholy symbols on the walls had faded. Eryndor leaned heavily on his staff, his body trembling from the effort of the spell. "You did it," Katarina said, stepping over the bodies of the fallen. Her voice held a note of genuine respect. "The ritual is broken." Cole approached, his sword slick with blood. "You're reckless, Mage, but effective. I'll give you that." Eryndor managed a weak smile. "High praise coming from you." They returned to Nuln victorious, but Eryndor knew the victory was only temporary. Chaos was insidious, and the cult's presence was a reminder that the fight against it was far from over. A growing reputation. Back at the keep, Falkenstein greeted them with approval. The Count, ever pragmatic, saw Eryndor's actions as proof of his value. "You've earned your place here, wizard," Falkenstein said. "But be wary. Chaos does not forget its enemies." Eryndor nodded, knowing the Count's words were true. The cult had been defeated, but its whispers lingered in his mind, a chilling reminder of the darkness that threatened the Empire. As he stood on the battlements that night, gazing at the stars, Eryndor felt the winds of magic swirl around him. He was no longer the unsure initiate of the colleges. Here, in the heart of Wissenland, he was carving his own path. A path fraught with danger, but also with destiny. Far to the north, in the chaos wastes, a dark figure stirred. The echoes of Eryndor's magic had reached him, and his lips curled into a smile. "The boy grows stronger," the figure murmured. "Soon we will see what he is truly capable of." Chapter 6. Schemes and Shadows. The embers of victory in the abandoned mine had barely cooled when Lady Katarina von Schreiber summoned Eryndor to her private chambers within the keep. The spymaster's quarters were dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of ink and wax. Scrolls and letters lay scattered across her desk, alongside maps marked with cryptic annotations. Katarina herself sat in the shadows, her sharp eyes studying Eryndor as he entered. "Close the door," she said curtly, motioning for him to sit. Eryndor obeyed, his curiosity piqued. Katarina was not one to mince words, and the urgency in her tone sent a ripple of unease through him. The conspiracy revealed. "By the storm brewing in Wissenland," Katarina began, her voice low. "And it's not just chaos cultists skulking in the hills. This threat comes from within." Eryndor leaned forward. "What kind of threat?" Katarina's lips tightened. "A conspiracy among the nobility led by Baron Leopold Krantz. He's a powerful man, wealthy, influential, and dangerously ambitious. For years he's been consolidating his power, and now he's making his move. My agents have uncovered whispers of treason. Krantz and his allies plan to overthrow Count Falkenstein, seizing Wissenland for themselves." "That's treason," Eryndor said, his fists clenching. "Why hasn't Falkenstein acted?" "But we don't have enough proof," Katarina replied. "Krantz is too well connected to accuse without evidence. Worse still, there's another layer to this. My agents believe chaos cultists are involved, using Krantz as a pawn to destabilize the province. Eryndor's stomach twisted. So what do we do? Katarina's eyes narrowed. We uncover the truth, quietly. If chaos is involved, I'll need your expertise. The winds leave traces, and if there are shrines or rituals at play, you'll sense them. Eryndor nodded, determination hardening his voice. Where do we start? The investigation begins. Katarina's network of informants quickly led them to their first lead, an abandoned manor on the outskirts of Nome, long rumored to be a meeting place for Kranz's allies. The house, once a stately residence, now stood in disrepair, its windows boarded and its grounds overgrown. Eryndor and Katarina approached under the cover of darkness, accompanied by two of her most trusted agents. The air around the manor felt heavy, oppressive, as though the land itself recoiled from what had transpired there. Eryndor paused at the entrance, his senses attuned to the winds of magic. A faint trace of ulgu, the wind of shadows, lingered in the air, mingling with something darker. "There's magic here," he whispered, "and not the good kind." Katarina nodded, drawing a slender dagger from her belt. "Then we proceed carefully." The first shrine. Inside, the manor was a ruin of decay. The walls were cracked, the furniture rotting, and the air thick with the stench of mildew. Yet as they ventured deeper, they found signs of recent activity. Footprints in the dust, discarded torches, and scraps of parchment scrawled with cryptic symbols. In the cellar, they uncovered the source of the dark magic, a crude shrine built from bone and blackened iron, its surface inscribed with the sigil of Tzich, the changer of ways. Candles burned with an unnatural light, and the air thrummed with chaotic energy. Eryndor felt the winds swirl around him, the touch of ulgu and akshi sending chills down his spine. He extended a hand, channeling the stabilizing force of Gairan to counteract the corruption. The flames sputtered and died, the sigil's power fading as the shrine crumbled. Katarina knelt beside the remains, sifting through the debris. "This confirms it," she said grimly. "Krantz isn't just a traitor, he's in league with chaos." A dangerous trail. The discovery of the shrine marked the beginning of a perilous journey. Over the following weeks, Eryndor and Katarina followed the trail of Krantz's conspiracy, uncovering more shrines hidden in remote caves, abandoned farms, and forgotten ruins. Each site was a step closer to the heart of the conspiracy, but also a step deeper into danger. His misfortune spilled blood from the wounds on his arms, which stingered from the leg bruised with gash. The cultists, realizing they were being hunted, began to strike back. Eryndor found himself in skirmishes with robed fanatics wielding dark magic, their twisted forms bearing the marks of chaos. His mastery of multiple winds proved invaluable, allowing him to counter their spells and protect Katarina's agents. Yet, each battle left him drained, the weight of his power growing heavier with every confrontation. The secret meeting. Their investigation eventually led them to a secluded hunting lodge deep in the forest, a place where Krantz himself was rumored to meet with his allies. Katarina insisted on a stealthy approach, but Eryndor's presence was necessary to detect any magical defenses. As they approached, Eryndor felt the winds shift, the air around the lodge alive with dark energy. "There's something here," he murmured. "A ward, maybe. I'll need time to break it." Katarina nodded. "Do it. We'll cover you." Eryndor focused, weaving the winds of Azir and Ulgu to unravel the enchantment. As the ward dissipated, they crept closer, peering through the windows. Inside, they saw Krantz and a group of nobles gathered around a table, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a chaos sigil etched into the wood. Katarina's eyes narrowed. "This is it. We have what we need." But before they could act, one of the cultists turned, his eyes glowing with unnatural light. "We're not alone," he hissed. The battle. The lodge erupted into chaos as the cultists attacked. Katarina's agents struck with deadly precision, their daggers finding throats and hearts, while Eryndor unleashed a torrent of magic. Flames roared through the lodge, lightning crackled across the walls, and shadows coiled around their enemies, blinding and disorienting them. Krantz himself fled through a side door, and Katarina pursued, her movements swift and silent. Eryndor remained behind, his focus on the cultists. The winds swirled around him, and he felt their seductive power pulling at him, urging him to take more, to unleash more. "Now," he whispered, steadying himself. With a final surge, he cast a spell that shattered the chaos sigil, banishing the dark energy from the room. The surviving cultists collapsed, their connection to the winds severed. Aftermath. Katarina returned moments later, her blade slick with blood. "Krantz escaped," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "But he won't get far. He's exposed now." Eryndor nodded, his exhaustion evident. "The cult is broken. For now." They returned to Nuln with the evidence they had gathered, letters, artifacts, and the testimony of captured cultists. Falkenstein, though furious at Krantz's betrayal, commended their efforts. "You've done well," he told Eryndor. "But this is far from over. Krantz is still out there, and chaos does not forgive failure." As Eryndor stood on the battlements that night, staring out into the darkened countryside, he felt the winds stir around him. The fight against chaos was far from over, and the shadows were only growing deeper. Far to the north, the dark figure who had watched Eryndor's progress smiled. "He's stronger than I thought," the figure murmured. "But strength alone will not save him." Chapter 7. The Coup Unveiled. The city of Nuln hummed with tension. The upcoming Imperial Council meeting, where elector counts and their representatives would gather to discuss the Empire's affairs, was a rare and monumental event. The streets were alive with the chatter of merchants, travelers, and nobles, all eager to witness the displays of power and diplomacy. But behind the grandeur lay danger. Eryndor and Lady Katarina von Schreiber had uncovered damning evidence of Baron Leopold Krantz's plot to assassinate Count Falkenstein during the council. The conspiracy, fueled by chaos corruption, aimed not only to eliminate Falkenstein but to plunge Wissenland into chaos, paving the way for the cultists to expand their influence. Time was running out. A risky infiltration. "Krantz won't act openly," Katarina said, pacing in her office. The spymaster's usually calm demeanor was tinged with frustration. "He'll rely on proxies and shadows. We need to know the details of his plan before we can stop it." Eryndor leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We know the meeting is his stage. The assassination will happen there. But how?" Katarina stopped, her sharp eyes locking on his. "There's one way to find out. Krantz is hosting a secret gathering tonight with his co-conspirators. If we can infiltrate it, we'll get the answers we need." Eryndor raised an eyebrow. "You mean I'll infiltrate it?" "You're the only one who can," she replied. "The winds of magic leave traces in his dealings. If there are wards, enchantments, or hidden agents, you'll sense them." Eryndor sighed. "And if I'm caught?" "Better have a spell prepared," Katarina said with a wry smirk. "But don't worry, I'll be nearby." The gathering. That evening, Eryndor donned a plain cloak and concealed his staff beneath its folds. The meeting was being held in the wine cellar of a prominent merchant's villa, one of Krantz's many allies. Katarina had secured Eryndor a forged invitation, but getting in was only the first challenge. The villa was crawling with guards, and the conspirators themselves were bound to be suspicious. As he entered the cellar, Eryndor immediately felt the oppressive weight of magic in the air. A faint trace of Ugu lingered, its shadowy tendrils weaving through the room. His eyes darted to the far corner, where a faint shimmer marked the presence of an enchanted ward. It was designed to obscure the gathering from prying eyes and ears. The conspirators were gathered around a long table, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single candelabra. At the head of the table sat Baron Krantz, his cold eyes scanning the room as he spoke. "The council will be our moment," Krantz said, his voice low and measured. "Falkenstein's death will be swift and decisive. Our agents are already in place, servants, guards, even one of his advisors. When the time comes, they will strike." Eryndor's pulse quickened as he edged closer, keeping to the shadows. He focused on Krantz's words, committing every detail to memory. "The poison will be delivered in his wine," Krantz continued. "Subtle, untraceable. By the time the council realizes what's happened, Falkenstein will be dead and will seize control of Wissenland." Discovered. As Eryndor listened, a chill ran down his spine. He felt a sudden ripple in the winds of magic. Someone was probing the room with enchantments. Before he could react, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Who are you?" Eryndor turned to see a man rising from the table, his hand glowing with the faint light of Akshi, the wind of fire. The conspirators followed his gaze, their eyes narrowing as they saw Eryndor. Thinking quickly, Eryndor raised his hands in mock surrender. "Forgive me, my lords. I was told this was a gathering of those loyal to Krantz. I didn't mean to intrude." Krantz's expression darkened. "I don't know you. Who sent you?" Eryndor's mind raced. "Magister Kalerich," he said, naming his former mentor at the Celestial College. "He shares your vision for Wissenland's future?" For a moment Krantz seemed to consider the lie, but then the mage who had first spoken stepped forward, his hand blazing with flame. "He's lying. His aura reeks of Falkenstein's court." Krantz's face twisted with fury. "Kill him!" A narrow escape. Eryndor had been prepared for this. As the conspirators surged toward him, he reached out to the winds of magic, weaving together the powers of Azir and Ulgu. A flash of lightning illuminated the cellar, blinding his attackers, while shadows coiled around him, cloaking him in darkness. He darted toward the exit, dodging spells and blades as chaos erupted behind him. A fireball grazed his shoulder, sending a searing pain through his body, but he didn't stop. With a final surge of energy, he burst through the cellar door and into the night. Outside, Katerina was waiting with her agents. "Trouble?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Always," Eryndor replied, clutching his side. "They're planning to poison Falkenstein at the council. We need to act now." Setting the stage. Back at the keep, Falkenstein listened intently as Eryndor and Katerina relayed what they had learned. The Count's face was grim, but his resolve was unshaken. "They'll expect me to act defensively," Falkenstein said. "But we'll turn the tables. Katerina, double the guard at the council. Ensure my food and drink are handled only by those you trust. Eryndor, you'll attend the meeting as well. If Krantz makes a move, I want you to expose him." Eryndor nodded. "I'll do what I can." As the meeting broke up, Falkenstein placed a hand on Eryndor's shoulder. "You've done well, wizard, but the real test is tomorrow. Be ready." The council approaches. The stage was set for the confrontation. The Imperial Council would bring together the most powerful figures in the Empire, their alliances and rivalries simmering beneath a veneer of civility. In this volatile mix, Eryndor and Katerina would have to tread carefully, for one wrong move could plunge Wissenland, and perhaps the entire Empire, into chaos. The impresario. Far to the north, in the shadow of the chaos wastes, the dark figure watching Eryndor's progress smiled once more. "The pieces are falling into place," he murmured. "Let's see if the boy can survive the game." Chapter 8. The Assassination Attempt. The Imperial Council Hall was a testament to the Empire's power and history. Its vaulted ceilings were adorned with tapestries depicting Sigmar's triumphs, and the air buzzed with the murmur of powerful men and women exchanging veiled barbs and uneasy pleasantries. The room was alive with tension as Elector Counts, advisors, and envoys took their places at the long, ornately carved table. At the head of the room sat Count Otto von Falkenstein, his commanding presence radiating authority. Eryndor stood nearby, draped in the dark blue robes of the Celestial Order, his staff in hand. From his position he scanned the room, his senses attuned to the winds of magic, searching for any hint of foul play. Beside him, Lady Katarina von Schreiber whispered instructions to her agents, who had blended seamlessly into the crowd. The plan was simple: identify and expose Baron Krantz and his conspirators before they could strike. But as the meeting began, Eryndor couldn't shake the feeling that chaos was already in motion. A subtle start. The council began with the usual formalities: pledges of loyalty, updates on provincial matters, and thinly veiled political maneuvering. Falkenstein spoke with confidence, his words met with nods and murmurs of approval from most, though Eryndor noted the subtle scowls of Krantz's allies. Baron Krantz himself sat further down the table, his face calm and impassive, but Eryndor could feel the undercurrent of malice emanating from him. The winds of magic stirred faintly around the Baron, a subtle disturbance that Eryndor couldn't ignore. As the discussions dragged on, servants moved quietly around the hall, refilling goblets and delivering trays of food. Eryndor's attention snapped to Falkenstein's goblet as one servant, a young man with shaking hands, poured a deep red wine. A faint shimmer danced around the liquid, visible only to Eryndor's trained eyes. "Poison," he muttered under his breath. The first strike. Before Falkenstein could raise the goblet to his lips, Eryndor extended his hand, summoning the wind of Azir. A bolt of blue lightning arced across the room, striking the goblet and shattering it in the Count's hand. The hall fell silent, every head turning toward Eryndor. What is the meaning of this?" Falkenstein demanded, his tone laced with both anger and surprise. "That wine was poisoned," Eryndor said, his voice steady. He pointed to the servant, who froze in place, his face pale. "Him. He's part of it." The room erupted into chaos as guards seized the servant, who stammered denials before suddenly screaming, his body convulsing. Dark energy poured from his eyes and mouth as his body twisted and deformed, transforming into a grotesque monstrosity, a chaos-bound assassin. Screams filled the hall as the creature lunged toward Falkenstein, its claws raking the air. Eryndor stepped forward, his staff glowing with celestial light. With a word of power, he unleashed a torrent of lightning, striking the creature and reducing it to a smoldering heap. But the attack was only the beginning. Krantz revealed. The hall's doors slammed shut, and the air grew heavy with the oppressive presence of chaos. Baron Krantz rose from his seat, his calm facade shattering into a twisted grin. "Well done, wizard," he sneered. "You've spared Falkenstein for now, but you cannot stop what is coming." The winds of magic coalesced around Krantz as he raised his hands, his voice resonating with unnatural power. "I call upon you, changer of ways, grant me your favor. Unleash your might upon this place." The sigil of Tzeentch burned into the floor beneath him, and the room erupted with blinding light. When the light faded, a massive, otherworldly figure stood in the center of the hall, a lord of change, its iridescent wings spreading wide, its talons crackling with chaotic energy. Krantz fell to his knees before the demon, his voice trembling with both fear and reverence. "I have done as you asked. Deliver me from—" Before he could finish, the demon's talons struck him down, reducing him to a smear of ash. The Lord of Change turned its gaze to the council, its many eyes glimmering with malice. "Mortals!" it intoned, its voice a cacophony of whispers and screams. "Your time has come to an end." Chaos unleashed. The hall descended into utter chaos. Nobles scrambled to escape, only to find the doors sealed by dark magic. Falkenstein barked orders to his guards, but the demon's power was overwhelming, scattering them like leaves in the wind. Eryndor stepped forward, his grip on his staff tightening. The winds of magic swirled around him, and he drew deeply from them, weaving together Azir, Akshi, and Gyron, in a desperate bid to counter the demon's power. "Face me, servant of chaos," he shouted, his voice ringing with defiance. The demon turned its many eyes toward him, a faint smile playing across its beak-like mouth. "You dare challenge me, little mage? Very well." The battle that followed was a blur of fire, lightning, and shadow. Eryndor's spells clashed with the demons, their energies tearing through the hall. With each strike, the winds threatened to overwhelm him, their chaotic nature straining his body and mind. But he pressed on, drawing upon every ounce of his strength. He conjured barriers of light to shield the nobles, torrents of fire to drive the demon back, and bursts of life magic to heal the wounded. The room became a battlefield, the very air vibrating with power. A desperate gamble. Despite his efforts, the demon's power was immense. Eryndor knew he couldn't defeat it through sheer force alone. He needed a plan, a way to banish it before it could destroy them all. Recalling his training, he began to weave a binding spell, combining the stabilizing force of Gyran with the precision of Azir. The spell was dangerous, its success uncertain, but it was their only hope. As the demon lunged toward him, Eryndor unleashed the spell. Golden vines of light erupted from the floor, wrapping around the creature and pulling it toward the sigil it had emerged from. The demon thrashed and roared, its form distorting as the binding took hold. "No," it bellowed. "This is not horror." With a final surge of power, Eryndor completed the spell. The sigil flared brightly, and the demon was sucked back into the void, its screams fading into silence. Aftermath. The council hall was in ruins, its walls scorched and cracked. The surviving nobles stared at Eryndor in stunned silence, their faces a mix of awe and fear. Falkenstein approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You saved us," the count said, his voice heavy with gratitude. "Wissenland owes you its life." But Eryndor felt no triumph. The cost of the battle weighed heavily on him, and the whispers of chaos still lingered in his mind. As the hall was cleared and order restored, Katerina approached, her expression grim. "Krantz is dead, but this isn't over. Chaos doesn't give up so easily." Eryndor nodded. "I know. This was just the beginning." Far to the north, in the shadow of the chaos wastes, the dark figure watching Eryndor's progress laughed softly. "The boy grows stronger," it murmured, "but strength alone will not save him from what's to come." Chapter 9. The Demon's Wrath. The shattered council hall was a scene of chaos. The surviving nobles cowered behind overturned tables, the air heavy with the stench of ozone and charred stone. The Lord of Change, its towering form bristling with arcane power, surveyed the room with an almost amused detachment. Its eyes, dozens of them scattered across its alien visage, gleamed with malice. Eryndor stood at the center of the hall, his staff glowing faintly as he summoned the winds of magic. Sweat dripped from his brow, and his muscles trembled with the effort of holding the raw power coursing through him. "You've meddled enough, mortal," the demon hissed, its voice a symphony of overlapping whispers. "Bow to the changer of ways, and I may spare you the torment of knowing your place in the great tapestry." "I bow to no one," Eryndor replied, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. "You've made a mistake coming here." The demon's laughter echoed through the hall. "Have I? Then come, little mage. Show me what you've learned." A clash of power. The demon's talons sliced through the air, arcs of dark energy trailing in their wake. Eryndor raised his staff, weaving a barrier of azure to deflect the blow. The collision sent a shockwave rippling through the hall, knocking over chairs and extinguishing the remaining candles. Eryndor retaliated with a blast of fire, the wind of Akshi roaring to life in his hands. Flames licked at the demon's feathers, but it shrugged off the attack with an almost casual flick of its wings. "You'll need more than fire to banish me," it sneered, hurling a bolt of pure chaos energy. The air rippled as the magic surged toward Eryndor, but he countered with a burst of ulgu, shadows coiling around him and dissipating the attack. The winds of magic swirled violently, their chaotic nature threatening to overwhelm Eryndor. He could feel them tugging at his mind, whispering promises of power, urging him to let go of his restraint. The whispers of chaos. As the battle raged, the demon's voice slithered into Eryndor's thoughts, bypassing his wards and defenses. "You're strong, mortal," it whispered. "Stronger than most. But you're wasting your potential, clinging to the lies of the colleges and the Empire. Embrace the winds as they are, unrestrained, unshackled, and I will show you true power." Eryndor's grip on his staff tightened, his focus wavering. The temptation was palpable. He had always felt the pull of the winds, their chaotic beauty a siren song that no magister had ever truly explained. For a moment, the idea of embracing that power, of becoming more than what the colleges allowed, seemed almost reasonable. But then he thought of Falkenstein, Katerina, and the countless lives depending on him. He remembered the villagers of Hochendorf, the chaos cults he had fought, and the horrors that unchecked magic had wrought. With a deep breath, he steadied himself. "You're right about one thing," Eryndor said aloud, his voice cutting through the demon's whispers. "I am strong enough to destroy you." The demon snarled, its amusement giving way to anger. "You dare defy me?" The binding spell. Eryndor knew brute force wouldn't be enough to defeat the demon. It was too powerful, its essence too deeply tied to the winds of chaos. Instead, he focused on weaving a binding spell, one that would anchor the demon to the sigil it had emerged from and banish it back to the realm of chaos. Drawing on the stabilizing energy of Gairan, he created a foundation for the spell. The green light of life magic spread across the floor, forming a circle around the demon. Next, he called upon Aesir, summoning the precision of the heavens to inscribe runes of power into the air. The demon roared, sensing its danger. It lashed out with its talons, but Eryndor deflected the attack with a wall of fire, the wind of Ixi surging to his aid. "You'd think your feeble tricks can bind me," the demon growled, its form beginning to shimmer as it tried to escape the growing circle. "I am eternal." Eryndor ignored its taunts, pouring every ounce of his will into the spell. The winds fought him, their chaotic nature threatening to unravel his work, but he held firm. The runes glowed brighter, the circle tightening around the demon. The final push. As the binding spell neared completion, the demon unleashed a desperate attack. It raised its staff, summoning a storm of raw chaos energy that threatened to consume the entire hall. Eryndor gritted his teeth, channeling all the winds at once to create a shield around himself and the remaining council members. The strain was immense. The winds raged within him, their conflicting energies threatening to tear him apart, his vision blurred, his body trembling as he pushed himself beyond his limits. But he refused to falter. With a final surge of power, Eryndor completed the spell. The runes flared brilliantly, and the sigil beneath the demon erupted in light. The creature's form distorted, its screams filling the hall as it was dragged back into the void. "Oh no!" it roared, its many eyes locking onto Eryndor. "This is not over!" With a blinding flash, the demon was gone. The hall fell silent, save for the crackling of smoldering debris. Krantz's capture. As the dust settled, Eryndor turned his attention to the far side of the hall, where Katerina had cornered Baron Krantz. The nobleman was on his knees, his face pale and bloodied. "It's over, Krantz," Katerina said coldly, pressing a dagger to his throat. "Your coup has failed." Krantz sneered, his composure shattered. "You think this is the end? Chaos is eternal. You've only delayed the inevitable." Katerina's expression didn't change. "Perhaps, but you won't live to see it." Eryndor placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. He's more valuable alive. We need his testimony to expose the rest of his conspirators." Katerina hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But if he so much as breathes wrong, he's mine." The aftermath. With Krantz in chains and the demon banished, the council hall was slowly restored to order. Falkenstein approached Eryndor, his face a mixture of gratitude and concern. "You saved us," the count said, "but at great cost. Are you all right?" Eryndor nodded, though his exhaustion was evident. "I'll manage. But this isn't over." Krantz was right about one thing: chaos doesn't stop. It will come again. "Then we'll be ready," Falkenstein replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Because of you, Wissenland still stands." As Eryndor left the hall that night, he couldn't shake the memory of the demon's whispers. The winds of magic still swirled around him, their chaotic nature a constant reminder of the danger and the temptation they posed. Far to the north, in the shadow of the chaos wastes, the dark figure who had watched Eryndor's progress stood before a flickering portal. "The boy grows stronger," it murmured. "But the game has only just begun." Chapter 10. The Aftermath. The morning after the battle in the council hall, a somber quiet hung over Nuln. The once proud chamber where elector counts debated the fate of the empire now bore the scars of chaos. Shattered walls, scorched wood, and lingering whispers of dark magic that even Eryndor's banishment spell couldn't fully erase. The city stirred with rumors of what had transpired, and though Falkenstein had ordered the events contained, whispers spread through the streets like wildfire. Eryndor sat alone in the keep's library, gazing at the pale light filtering through the stained glass windows. His body still ached from the battle, and the winds of magic felt restless, their chaotic whispers louder than ever. He tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of his breath. "Still with us, then?" a familiar voice asked, pulling him from his thoughts. Eryndor turned to see Lady Katerina von Schreiber leaning against the doorway, her sharp gaze softened by something approaching gratitude. "The Count wants to see you," she said. "He's waiting in the great hall." "Did he mention why?" Eryndor asked, rising to his feet. Katerina smirked faintly. "You saved his life, and Wissenland along with it. If I had to guess, he's not calling you in for a reprimand." The reward. The great hall was filled with the Count's advisors, guards, and nobles, some of whom still bore signs of the chaos that had erupted during the council meeting. Falkenstein stood at the head of the room clad in his ceremonial armor, his expression as stern and commanding as ever. Eryndor stepped forward, bowing his head. "My lord." Falkenstein regarded him for a long moment, his piercing eyes betraying a flicker of warmth. "Eryndor, you've done more for Wissenland in these past weeks than most men accomplish in a lifetime. You exposed a conspiracy, saved my life, and drove back a demon of chaos. For that you have my thanks, and the thanks of this province." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, though Eryndor noted the wary glances exchanged among some of the nobles. He could feel their unease, their mistrust of his powers. Falkenstein raised his hand, silencing the room. "It is not enough to thank you with words. Wissenland owes you its life, and so it is only fitting that you be given a place of honor among us. From this day forward, you are protector of Wissenland. You will advise me directly on all matters of magic and defense, and your voice will carry the same weight as any of my most trusted counselors." Eryndor blinked, stunned by the announcement. "My lord, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Falkenstein replied, stepping forward and placing a hand on his shoulder. "Simply continue to fight for Wissenland as you have done. This province and the empire will need your strength in the days to come." The shadows of doubt. The ceremony ended with applause, though Eryndor couldn't help but notice how restrained it was. As the crowd dispersed, several nobles approached to offer their congratulations. But their smiles were thin, their words laced with politeness rather than sincerity. Katerina appeared at his side, her sharp eyes scanning the departing crowd. "They're afraid of you," she said bluntly. Eryndor sighed. I notice. They think I'm dangerous." "They're not entirely wrong," she replied, her tone neutral. "You wield power they don't understand, and that scares them. But that fear can be useful if you know how to manage it." "And if I can't?" Eryndor asked. Katerina smiled faintly. "Then I'll make sure it doesn't get out of hand." Her words were meant as reassurance, but they did little to ease the knot in Eryndor's chest. He had felt the weight of his powers growing ever since the battle in the council hall, the winds swirling more fiercely around him with every spell he cast. It wasn't just the nobles who were afraid. He was beginning to fear himself. A quiet reflection. That evening, Eryndor retreated to the battlements of Falkenstein's keep, the cold wind biting at his skin. The city of Nun stretched out before him, its streets alive with flickering lanterns and the distant hum of activity. For all its flaws, it was a city worth protecting, a beacon of hope in a world teetering on the brink of darkness. But as he gazed at the stars, his thoughts drifted to the demon's whispers during their battle. The creature had spoken of his potential, of power beyond anything the colleges could teach him. Even now, the winds of magic seemed to echo those words, their chaotic pull stronger than ever. "You're brooding again," Katerina said, stepping onto the battlements beside him. She held 2 cups of spiced wine, handing one to Eryndor. "Push, thinking," he replied, taking the cup with a nod of thanks. "The winds feel different, like they're calling to me." Katerina studied him for a moment. "You've been through a lot. You're bound to feel the weight of it, but don't let it consume you. You're more than the magic you wield." Eryndor took a sip of the wine, its warmth spreading through him. "And if I'm not?" Katerina's voice was firm. "You are. I wouldn't have brought you into this if I thought otherwise." They stood in silence for a while, the wind carrying the distant sounds of the city below. But even as Katerina's words lingered in his mind, Eryndor couldn't shake the feeling that the battle against chaos was far from over. The deeper threat. As the stars wheeled overhead, Eryndor closed his eyes, letting the winds swirl around him. He could feel their power, their chaos, their potential, and their danger. Somewhere in the distance, the forces of chaos were gathering, their plans unfolding in ways he couldn't yet see. And somewhere in the north, a dark presence watched him, waiting for the moment to strike. Eryndor opened his eyes, his resolve hardening. The road ahead would be long and perilous, but he would face it head-on, for Wissenland, for the Empire, and for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Far to the north, in the shadow of the chaos wastes, the dark figure who had been watching Eryndor's progress laughed softly. "The boy resists," it murmured. "Good. The stronger he grows, the sweeter his fall will be." Epilogue. The Winds of Destiny. The night was still, the air crisp and sharp, as winter began its quiet descent over Wissenland. The stars above Nuln sparkled brighter than Eryndor had ever seen, their constellations twisting and shifting as though alive. The city below him was quiet now, its citizens retreating to the safety of their homes after weeks of fear and uncertainty. Eryndor stood alone on the highest tower of Falkenstein's keep, his staff planted firmly beside him. His blue robes, stitched with celestial symbols, billowed faintly in the breeze. The weight of recent events pressed against his chest, a burden he bore willingly, though it grew heavier with every passing day. He closed his eyes and let the wind of Azir, the blue wind of prophecy, flow through him. It was a calming force, a soothing breeze that brought clarity to his thoughts. But tonight it carried something more, something urgent, a vision of the future. The world around him seemed to fade, replaced by a vast, featureless plain. The air was thick with ash, and the ground trembled beneath Eryndor's feet. As he gazed into the distance, the horizon erupted with fire and shadow. An army stretched as far as the eye could see, hordes of chaos warriors, their blackened armor glinting in the flickering light of countless war banners. Towering above them were grotesque monstrosities, twisted demons, their forms shifting and warping as they marched. The air was alive with dark magic, and the earth itself seemed to writhe in pain beneath their advance. At the head of the army stood a figure clad in jagged black armor, a helm crowned with curling horns. Its weapon, a massive axe wreathed in flames, crackled with unholy energy. Though its face was hidden, Eryndor could feel its gaze pierce through him, a cold and mocking presence that sent shivers down his spine. And then the figure raised its hand, pointing toward the Empire. The winds howled, carrying with them the screams of the damned, and the vision shattered into darkness. The path ahead. Eryndor's eyes snapped open, his breath ragged as he steadied himself against the tower wall. The stars above no longer seemed comforting. They felt distant, indifferent to the horrors unfolding below. He let the vision settle in his mind, piecing together its meaning. It wasn't the first time the winds had shown him glimpses of the future, but this one was different. It was clearer, more vivid, and far more terrifying. This was no mere warning. It was a prophecy. "War is coming," he murmured to himself. "A war the Empire isn't ready for." The thought chilled him, but it also steeled his resolve. He had spent his life questioning his place in the world, torn between his connection to the winds and the suspicion of those around him. But now, his path was clear. He would fight, not because it was his duty, but because the winds of magic. The winds of magic swirled around him, their chaotic whispers growing louder. He could feel them more acutely than ever, each one distinct yet interconnected. Zir, the wind of the heavens, guiding him with its light. Gyron, the wind of life, grounding him in the natural world. Akshi, the wind of fire, fueling his defiance against the dark. Ulgu, the wind of shadows, offering tools for deception and strategy. They were dangerous, unpredictable forces, and he knew they could destroy him if he let them. But they were also his greatest weapon against the darkness. He would wield them, no matter the cost. Eryndor tightened his grip on his staff, its gemstone glinting faintly in the starlight. He thought of Falkenstein, who had placed his trust in him, and of Katarina, who had fought beside him despite her doubts. He thought of the people of Wissenland, the Empire, and the countless innocents who would be crushed beneath the boots of chaos if he failed. "I will not let this happen," he said aloud, his voice firm. "I will fight, for them, for all of us." A fateful resolve. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Eryndor turned from the tower and descended into the keep. His work was far from over. The forces of chaos would not rest, and neither would he. Far to the north, in the shadow of the chaos wastes, the dark figure who had been watching Eryndor stirred, its glowing eyes fixed on the distant south, where the Empire lay vulnerable. "The boy has made his choice," it murmured, its voice a rumble of disdain and anticipation. "But no choice is without consequence. Let us see if his strength can endure what is to come." The winds carried the figure's laughter into the void, where it mingled with the cries of the damned and the whispers of the changer of ways. And so the game continued, its pieces moving inexorably toward a future shaped by war, magic, and fate.